All right, so here we are. I've got a simple one to start with. So FPGAs sound awesome. I haven't played with them, but they sound like the older version of basically the Raspberry Pi. You can program it to do anything. And so it has an encryption scheme, but it has a multi-boot option. And one of the boot options lets you feed in code, which it then decrypts. And it decrypts the first 32 bits of it before it notices that the stuff you're feeding in is garbage. So you can decrypt anything by just feeding it 32 bits at a time into the alternate boot. So that's good, clean fun. And
is that an Altera, like one of the standard Altera FPGAs, or?
at Ruhr, they did it, well, they didn't make it clear. The entire mainstream 7 series, X-Link 7 series FPGAs.
Xilinx, yes.
Xilinx, yeah. You use them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've never used them. What are they good for anyway?
I mean, I didn't even realize they had encryption built in. One of my friends is really into CPLDs and FPGAs and would love this article. But
Yeah.
as far as all FPGAs are the same, except some have more gates than others.
Yep. By the way, I'm feeling Irvin has vanished. No, he just his camera. There he is. Okay, good.
It's they're good for a lot of different things, but it stands for field programmable gate array, and they're really good for like I know that somebody was using them in a project to like drones that were going to operate in farmers' fields to identify weeds and plant diseases and stuff like that, because they're conducive to machine learning applications, because you can change the parameters quickly.
Yeah.
But for people at home that don't know what an FPGA is, it's essentially if you're trying to create a new microchip and you don't want to, have it fabbed up in a plant that could cost thousands of dollars, you can prototype it on what's called a FPGA, or field programmable gate array, which is basically just a bunch of logic gates that have to be programmed what to do. So you essentially program this device how to link up together. So you say this XOR goes to this NOR and so on and so forth. And then you can prototype essentially like silicon before you go off and send it to the factory. So you can take a FPGA and turn it into something like a 6502 CPU or a machine learning thing or whatever you need it to do.
Oh, okay. Thanks. That helps. And then we got the mail bone. I heard a lot about this one.
Yeah, this is kind of like all over the news this week, where they found a pretty serious vulnerability in the iOS mail app that can essentially pwn you without even opening the mail message, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, patch your iPhone right away.
Apparently so. Well, most iPhones automatically update. Most of them are actually kept up to date. So, not mine, but other people's.
Mine, not mine.
That's true, but studies show like 90% of them are up to date, whereas like 95% of Androids are like 2 years behind.
That seems like likely numbers.
Yeah. They're so bad that I know Apple and iOS both stopped publishing the numbers. Anyway, so all right, and then we got Ubuntu. A new Ubuntu.
20.04 has been released.
Mm-hmm. So what's good about it?
Using 5.4, the kernel. It doesn't have Python 2.7 installed.
Yeah, everybody's got rid of that.
Yeah. They're using Snap now more often than apt. So you'll get, you're going to install something, it'll show you the Snap install rather than apt.
Yeah, I used Snap a couple times. Didn't work very well. Yeah, hopefully I got it better.
Yeah, supposedly it's better. Some fractional scaling is now there. Some features is always the dark theme, because everybody likes that now. And then a couple of package updates, like using Firefox 75 out of the bat, GNOME 3.36.
So what's the difference between Snap and apt? Snap was intended for mobile devices or something, right?
Something like that. Well, Snap is more like a mini Docker. Here's your the app working in its own little world.
So does it isolate apps better or resolve dependencies better or something?
Yeah, it's all pre-packaged.
Yeah, well, so is apps, but it has all these dependencies that lead to trouble. So,
Right. So with Snap, you don't have the dependency trouble.
well, that's a good reason to use it. Okay.
No, but just like you said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I've had the same experience where some things work just fine and other things not so much.
Yep. Well, all right. That'll be interesting to see what comes of that. And they've got a ventilator just in time.
Yeah, so these people at NASA decided to do what a bunch of makers are told not to do, which is try to create their own ventilators.
Why not?
Well, because if your life depends on a piece of equipment, it better be tested and built by professionals who do a lot of research. People who have 3D printers have been trying to make their own masks
Yeah.
with various amounts of success. And I remember seeing one person made this mask, and it had a little breathing hole in the front. And they decided to use a filter that you would use for like air conditioning.
Yeah.
And a bunch of people had to chime in and say, hey, that's a bad idea because those filters contain fiberglass. So if you wear that for very long, you're going to get some terrible lung disease, like if you were to inhale bleach or something.
Like asbestos, yeah.
So that's why you really don't want hobbyists developing kind of DIY ventilators or life-saving equipment. But if you have a group of professionals like at NASA, they can develop things like ventilators, which are desperately needed, open source it so that anyone can build it or manufacture it and get it out there. And so this is really, really cool what they did. And I was not expecting this out of NASA, but
Yeah.
they were able to prototype and get a ventilator out in 37 days. And supposedly this has a lot of features that make it better than a lot of the commercial ones.
And I've heard the commercial ones are really expensive. So.
Yeah. This one's cheaper and can be kind of made faster with fewer parts.
So it's sort of like the IBM PC, where anybody could make a clone.
Exactly.
Oh, that makes sense. Is anybody making it yet in quantity?
Not yet. No, this is just the prototype, but it's ready to get out there and be manufactured by manufacturers. It's sort of like, it's one of those technologies that NASA creates,
Yeah.
and then the private sector like jumps on, and usually it's kind of by accident. Like the memory foam mattresses. NASA made that for space travel, and then someone said, "Oh, let's make beds with this." But this was purposely built so that we could have ventilators.
Well, good.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Of course, the rotten thing is when they put you on a ventilator, you're pretty much doomed anyway. They say you have like a 20% chance of ever living after you get so sick you're on a ventilator. But anyway, that's something.
Yep.
Anyway, all right. So then this one here is a little hard to understand. I came across this because of a Forbes article that got everything wrong. That's what tends to happen. That's why years ago I realized you have to be your own journalist if you want to say anything about science. So this is the Google team explaining what went wrong here. And what happened is Windows changed the way they handle tokens, and they broke the Chromium sandbox. So the Forbes article says everybody has to quit using Chrome. And then they say, the person who wrote the article told me everyone else uses the Chromium engine too. So it's not like moving to another browser will do any good anymore. So, but the point of this is helping me understand why there are all these privilege escalation flaws in Windows. Because the author here basically decides it doesn't really matter that much. But what's going on is when you have a parent-child relationship, you have a parent token, and you can fork and create a child, whatever Microsoft uses instead of fork, and then you have a child token which has a parent ID equal to the parent ID here. Or you can have a sibling token, a process that's created at the same level in the hierarchy with an identical parent ID. Those are the two things you can do. And there was one line of code here, which is what was used to do this process. And see, in the sandbox, the browser runs with a special token, which is very low privileges and cannot be assigned any high privileges. like the guest account, which is what it should do. And when you create a new process with the browser, the new process inherits permissions from the parent and cannot get any high privileges. And that was because of this line where the new parent token ID is the old token ID. So everything it creates is a child and therefore inherits all the privileges. But they changed it in a recent Windows update so that it inherits the parent privileges, moving it from a child of the browser to an equal of the browser. And the problem is that means it can now have higher privileges added to it, and you can use it for escape, to escape the sandbox, which is what he does here. But he says, in fact, there are several defenses you have to overcome. And he said, something you should realize is the sandbox is always pretty fragile. The sandbox relies on several defenses that aren't really that perfect in themselves. And you shouldn't totally freak out and say, it used to be really secure and now it's really, it's one layer of several defenses that's gone. But anyway, I was glad to see this because as you know, in our pen testing class, we do token theft with Metasploit and token cloning. And these tokens are really important in Windows. And it's interesting to learn a little more about how they're handled. Anyway, so I thought that was good. And it's a sandbox escape. And people are freaking out. But, you know, it just means they need to update Windows or change it again to make some patch on this mess.
Did they say why that change happened?
No, I think Microsoft hasn't said anything yet. They may be motivated to. But, of course, you know, this is, I think, the secret you learn is that all these defenses, all the sandboxes are notoriously weak. There's so many ways to break out of the sandbox. All browser defenses are notoriously weak. It's browsers, I think, are where you really have the dirty truth of security. It's just like your physical security. Like at City College, the buildings are locked down and you can't get in. Does that mean you can't get in? Not at all. There are locks you can pick. There are doors you can shim. You know, anything big and complicated, there are just all these holes and you can never find them all. Anyway, all right. And now we got this one, which is great for social engineering.
This is a really good story, not least of which because it happened to a security professional, somebody who's been in the security industry for several years, which really goes to show it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And I thought that the way the attackers did this was pretty clever. Really the pivotal thing in this article, in this story for me was the way that they got full access to this guy's account. Essentially the TLDR is that somebody probably stole his debit card number and PIN at like a gas pump or something, and then managed to get in and make some fraudulent transactions with that over time. And then the social engineering kicks in. So essentially they call this guy on like a Friday and say, hey, we noticed some fraudulent transactions on your account. We just wanted to check in with you on those because they don't look right. And he goes into his account and he's like, yeah, these are fraudulent. They aren't me. And the bank's like, oh, I'll take care of it. We just wanted you to be aware of what was going on, blah, blah, blah. And so the first call was to get the victim to think that, to get the victim comfortable with being called by the bank and told this, and then to think that they were looking into his case. Then they call him a day or two later and say, oh yeah, so we're working on that problem, and we just need a little and all this stuff. And so the guy thinking, okay, well, this is fishy. I'm gonna do what you're supposed to do, and I'm gonna call my bank. Puts the call from the scammers on hold and uses another phone to call his bank. When he does that and he finally gets through, the person on the other end said, oh yeah, we've got a call in progress with you right now. It shows in our system. Only what the scammers had done was to initiate a call with the bank, pretending to be him at the same time, so that it actually looked like the bank was on the phone with him. And so after the bank told him that, he was fully satisfied, like, okay, this is legit, and ended up Basically, the bank sent him a two-factor authentication code to his phone, and the scammers were asking for that code when he had him on the other line, and he just gave it to him. And then they initiated a fairly large wire transfer out of his account with that, which pretty good story.
Yeah. And it's hard to imagine any defense.
Yeah.
This is like one of those movies where everybody is fooling you. Your mate is an actor paid to trick you, and your boss is tricking you, and all the people on the street aren't really your friends. I mean, there's a level of social engineering where it's impossible to imagine ever detecting it.
The only defense for this is to hang up and call your bank's number, like just to never,
You're right.
just to never give any information when they call you, just to always call them.
Well, yeah, and he did gain trust in an untrusted channel unwisely. But, I think this is the case of almost all, in a sense, that was two-factor authentication, and that's the problem with two-factor. It's not really that strong. It's enough
Right.
bit of evidence that this channel should be trusted, but it doesn't prove it really.
Right. And I have to say kudos to this guy for being willing to share his story, because that had to be super embarrassing, especially as a security professional. But I think it's important. I think it's important to get stuff like this out here when it happens, just to help save other people from it happening to them.
Oh yeah, I appreciate knowing about this. It's good news.
Yep.
I don't know if he ever got his money back, but anyway. So who is getting hacked apparently?
Who?
Yeah. No, what's on second?
Right. So these are some old accounts that are still being used.
Oh yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah,
So
some old accounts that were taken a while ago, and they're being used to impersonate the WHO. It doesn't affect the WHO themselves, but it does affect any third parties and any extranets that they have that haven't migrated to to whatever system the WHO is using now. So they are kind of getting hit by it, and they're telling people, hey, watch out, be vigilant.
Yeah, I saw some people saying that there were hackers claiming they had hacked WHO, and of course they didn't. They just scraped available old dumps for addresses tied to WHO, and then people say you shouldn't even talk about it. You shouldn't even give them any bandwidth because you're helping these scammers have a fake hack. And that's, well, I don't know, but anyway, I mean that's a name for that attack. I forget what they call it, where you use old credentials that have been dumped before.
Credential stuffing.
Credential stuffing, yeah. So I mean, it is a real risk. And I'm glad that WHO officially had a statement to say about it. They're moving to a more secure system. That's a good idea, which I guess means two-factor. I mean, if you were just using two-factor, then this would be a non-story.
Right.
But almost nobody, I think, is using two-factor all the time. The only big company I know that is Google. They said they switched to it like 2 years ago. Everybody uses this USB thing, and they said they never got phished again. And by the way, my military job, we're all using two-factor. It is really, really, really annoying. Everything is sandboxed. You can't get the data off on a USB. You can't even print something out to read it. Everything has to stay on the sandbox system, but it is pretty secure, as far as I can tell.
I worked for a financial advisor that started implementing it like 15 years ago, and it was a pain, but it was very effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see why most companies don't do it, though, because you can't use your iPhone. You can't even send anything to someone else to get a comment. You can't get anybody to help you. It's just, you're really trapped in this little box.
And I'm sure it was expensive, because the way it worked for this company was I had a little hardware dongle, and like to log into my work accounts, I would have to press a button on the dongle and retrieve a code from a satellite. And so that can't have been cheap.
No, mine is just a military CIC card, but still the sandbox is what makes it safe and really annoying. Like I have to do everything in Windows on this laptop with nothing but Microsoft official software, which is, I've made my living on it before. Like I say, you're talking about going in the private sector. It's all Windows and Office out there. And I made my living in Windows and Office for years, and then I escaped. That's why I usually used to wear shirts that said, I get to use a Mac. You have to use a PC. And that's the way it is. Anyway. All right. So, and then Tempest at Home. Now, this is a great idea.
Right. So this is a terribly named article. What they should have named it is how to turn your GPU card into a wireless transmitter.
Oh,
And so it starts off by explaining, it's a good introduction to side channel frequency exfiltration.
mm-hmm.
It starts off by explaining what radio waves are, how they're produced. I remember one of your students, Sam, Kaz, we all know Kaz, was shocked to find out that all the traces on your PCB emit some form of EM radiation.
Oh, yeah.
And video cards in particular are very high powered and release a lot of EM radiation. Now the trick is, how do you control this radiation? How do you put into a form that you can pick up and decode? And what this author did is they tried this, simple writes to memory, but that's kind of hard to control and figure out, what you're doing exactly. But there are power management features on your GPU. So you can change the base clock very easily by steps, like 1 megahertz steps. And if you do that, you can start picking up radio waves from pretty far away at these ranges. So by shifting the frequency of the video card, you can send out data.
Mm-hmm. So it's a good side channel to exfiltrate data.
Yes.
And of course, to snoop on what's happening.
Right, to snoop on what's happening. I mean, it's just a great article if you're interested in figuring out how to do these kind of attacks.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna have to try this with one of my cheap SDR dongles.
Yeah,
this is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. This will work with a cheap SDR and a hopefully unshielded GPU.
I remember a few years ago I went to DEF CON and they had a hands-on workshop. We're using these SDRs to spy on cell phone calls. And I was there. I missed the first day. I showed up the second day and I said, is any of this legal? He said, you weren't here for the first day. Everything is 100% insanely, impossibly illegal. Never tell anybody you're doing this. And I said, well, I can't use it for homework that way. I said, no, don't tell anybody you're doing this. But you can totally snoop on cell phone calls. But of course,
as far as I know, you can't actually listen into cell phone calls anymore.
You have to downgrade them to the old GSM.
Yes, you would have to downgrade them. Yeah. But you can still listen. You can get some of the carrier maintenance, back end stuff. Mm-hmm. So you can tell when people are connecting, disconnecting, when they're getting a text message or something.
Yeah, if you really want to watch out people, you need to use SS7 phones. Yeah.
Right.
It also works for pager messages and air traffic control stuff. So, which is interesting.
I lived for years with a ham, and he could just find all kinds of transmissions. The schools and colleges and malls all had security guards in plain text, and the hospitals, and a lot of the airport traffic. A whole bunch of it is just unencrypted.
Yeah.
And it should be unencrypted. You don't want that encryption to fail, while you're trying to save someone's life. The problem is, of course, you turn on your SDR and you suddenly have everyone's personal information beamed into your living room. So
I went to Hope, and there was a guy there who had decided to test the police encrypted radios. And the police have an official encrypted radio, but somebody passed a law that you have to change the key every month, and they're really hard to use. So when they change the key, they mess it up frequently. So all the cops have learned to always just turn off the damn encryption, because that never works. So it's much worse than it would have been to just have a standard key that never changed.
And the cool thing is you can actually listen to the digital scanner transmissions with this. There was kind of a big fight for a while over them going from analog to digital scanner transmissions, because people weren't able to listen in with the old school police scanners. But you can actually use one of those cheap dongles there in the picture that you got up right now to listen to the digital transmissions, which I think I get why they would want to restrict it, but I think it's also important because, it's interesting when, like, for example, this happened to me recently where a bunch of neighbors and I heard a shooting happen really close by, and it was never in the news until like a month later. So, everybody's kind of wondering what the hell is going on. Had I not been able to listen to the police scanner, I wouldn't have known where to stay away from at the time.
Yeah, that's good. I think especially now with all the exposure of police corruption and police brutality, it's more important than ever to be watching what they're doing. Well, anyway, and then I've got this one I found pretty informative. This is Katie Mazouras, who is the person that's made Microsoft's bug bounty program. And I think she was also big on the Pentagon bug bounty program. And she seems to have moved on to do something else. And she seems to have sort of soured on bug bounties. In practice, they seem to be pretty awful. And this is a pretty amazing one. This guy found a bug bounty in an IBM commercial product, and he sent them a disclosure notice for free saying, I need to tell you there's a serious vulnerability in this. And all they said is, it's out of scope. We don't cover that kind of stuff, so we're going to totally ignore it. And he's like, dude, you're not going to fix it or anything? And they're like, no, totally not. And he can't get anyone's attention. It just goes into some part of the impenetrable bureaucracy where they just don't understand the significance of what they're doing. And that's one thing which certainly matches what I've had turning in bugs. And here's another one that's good. If you join a bug bounty program, before you join, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which says that even if they reject your submission, you can still never tell anybody anything about it. And so what companies, of course, have gotten out of this is the point of a bug bounty program is it is a way to hide everything and let it never come out. And the bug bounty people are very frustrated by this, but I think I'm not that excited because this is the way Microsoft used to be, and Apple. Their official policy is we have no flaws at all, and if anybody says we do, just make them shut up and continue to carry on because there aren't very many hackers and they won't find anything. And they tried that for years, just hiding them. It's hard for a company to make the transition from pretending there are no problems to actually admitting there's problems and having a whole series of updates and everything. And so anyway, it shouldn't be too surprising that a lot of people have been sort of joining bug bounty programs, but they don't actually plan on finding and fixing any bugs. They just see it as the latest way to like cover them up.
Yeah, she's been, first off, Kate Mazouras is amazing, and I want to be her when I grow up. But she's been talking about this for a few years because, they're really kind of stacked against these bug bounty programs are really kind of stacked against the researcher. And I mean, even when they are, legit, they tend to have extremely low payouts for the level of work involved and value delivered to the companies. So it's almost like they're intentionally discouraging people from finding these vulnerabilities and reporting them.
Yeah, I think the amount of money you're likely to get is very small. It reminds me, when I was a kid, people would start a garage rock band and say, we're going to get rich. And I say, no, you're going to find out what everybody else finds out, which is 0.1% get rich and the rest get nothing. And it's the same here. There are a couple people that made $1 million, but you're not going to be that one guy.
Sort of like working at community college.
Someone's making $1 million. Only the administrators. Anyway.
Yep.
You're telling me the teachers don't make hundreds of thousands of dollars every month, Sam, at a community college? I don't believe that.
I know that you're shocked, but
not at mine. And I don't think at any. Yeah. The only thing about
you gotta be an administrator if you want to make a few $100,000 a year.
Yeah, but at our college, the big benefit is the students don't have to go into debt. So,
but the professors do have to go into debt.
I know, that's why I thought Liz was telling me they're waiting for the interview for the full-time position and discussing how to like live in a tent or a van or something. And I'm reading stories about how other ones have to be like prostitutes on the side to be community college teachers because they can't possibly pay the rent. It is pretty gruesome. Anyway, that's why I highly recommend corporate work where you actually get paid. Anyway.
Yeah. Or, you could just resort to cybercrime because it's pretty effective these days. These guys managed to pull off a million heist just through old school email phishing and social engineering. This has been kind of the new hotness recently, where attackers have been targeting payouts from venture capital and private equity firms. And basically they get in the middle of a wire transfer scenario and then steal the money.
With lookalike domains,
So,
real simple attack.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, it's nothing complicated or, you don't have to have a ton of technical expertise to pull something like this off. It's really a combination of social engineering, timing, and setting up some fake domains that are close to the real ones.
Well, I think that's something that Rapid7 put out years ago at a conference. They scanned and found that like almost all hacks use like 10 famous vulns that were patched years ago. You don't need to do anything fancy. The same old standbys will still work often enough.
Yeah, so I thought that this was pretty good, and especially right now, a lot is likely to fly under the radar, and I think there's not a ton of oversight because people are so worried about other things that we're going to probably see some more stories like this coming about in the next few months.
Oh, I would think so. I mean, this is the first step in any social engineering campaign is to create some sort of distraction and chaos. And now standard procedures don't work. I'm sure right now, people trying to work from home with broken VPNs, they get some message. They aren't really sure how to get approval from the boss anymore or anything.
Yeah. And, it's pretty easy, especially with like clueless executives. Sometimes they're soft targets because they're not in that sort of paranoid security mindset. But even with security people, as you saw in the last story that I had, that's not enough to save you. So
no. And right now, I think a ton of people are completely lost because they haven't really got a home system that works. They don't really understand Zoom and stuff, and so they don't know what they're doing. All right. And there's satellite hacking. Boy, I don't know if this is going to happen.
Right. So this was supposed to be happening at DEF CON.
Yeah.
But since that's probably not going to happen, the Air Force is figuring out how to do the same thing, but from home.
That would be awesome.
So
we can do it remotely.
Like the Air Force is still trying to make this happen about the same time that they would if life hadn't turned upside down. So something to keep an eye out.
That would be awesome if we can do it online. I know they did an online car hacking thing a couple of weeks ago that Liz was in, and that's a great idea.
Yeah, they did it again for GrimCon when we were doing the COBOL CTF.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping
they're really getting good at that. So I think it's
stuff into Black Hat and DEF CON. So I'm hoping they don't just cancel them, but make them online. But
Black Hat said they were talking about ways to migrate online, so that's good.
I think that's going to be the only way to get any of this stuff for years. Like you said a while ago, I think even if this supposedly ends, people are not going to be able to fly to other countries and mash together for years. I think people are just not going to feel like doing that for a while.
Well, and there's just no real good way to effectively distance at DEF CON or Black Hat because there's so many people packed together in such a small space. I mean, just using the escalators or the elevators alone is insane.
Yeah, or talk. And it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I think companies are not going to want to accept the liability or pay for that anymore. They're going to say, wait a minute, if I spend a couple of grand for you guys to go to a conference, you're going to get sick. And so I won't actually benefit from this.
I mean, a bunch of them have pulled out already. And I mean, as it is, without a global pandemic, a lot of people still get sick every year at DEF CON anyway. They come home with a case of the con crud.
Yeah. But anyway, so if we can do it online, I'm all for it. Besides, you can't go to work anyway. That's
how the threat actors do it. They do it from home. So
yeah, that makes sense. And then Nintendo is still around. I haven't thought of it in years.
Yeah, I
They
was
have-
so surprised that
some
this
serious
company bigger
tech
than Sony is still around. I don't know why.
Well, I haven't played games in a long time, I guess.
Yeah, no. And Nintendo's bigger. Like I said, Nintendo's bigger than Sony. They're huge. They're like the Walt Disney of
Oh,
video games.
We're not gonna go anywhere.
Yeah, they're. In fact, I really wish they would expand out of the consoles because their hardware is so well designed and made. It's really frustrating to think that they're not doing things like making cell phones or computers. But okay, they just want
I
to make
would
consoles.
totally buy a Nintendo cell phone.
I would too. I would buy a real Famicom, 2020 computer. That would be amazing. But no.
so
But they got hacked. They got hacked.
it sounds like credential stuffing again. It sounds like they didn't steal it from Nintendo, or so they say.
Well, it's a bit more complicated. That's what I was thinking at first. They said it was obtained illegally by some of the means within our service. Okay, fine. But it also involved using old migrated IDs that they upgraded from in the past that people could still log in from.
Oh, they supported some legacy system.
Exactly. Which is and Nintendo's being very coy about it. And this might be kind of a cultural thing because of course Nintendo is a Japanese company.
Oh, yeah.
And it might be I know in the United States we're all like, you got to come clean and be like, this is what happened. There might be a bit more conservatism at Nintendo, and Nintendo itself is a very conservative company anyway.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like Disney for video games. So they're being very coy about what exactly happened, but they are admitting that a bunch of people's Nintendo accounts got hacked. So if you do have a Nintendo account, it's a good idea to set up two-factor auth, which they have now. And also, why are our little video game consoles now active targets of thieves and stuff? Like, that's not something I want to worry about. Like, if I buy a video game, the only kind of crime that I should be expecting is fun crime, not actual crime.
Right.
Well,
Years ago, I heard
I
valuable
wonder.
is World of Warcraft credentials. Games are big money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also another issue here is that I think a lot of adults buy Switches, and this is another pretty handy tool for credential stuffing attack because as much as we tell people not to do it, so many people use the same password for everything. So.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention is that, of course, this was used for money laundering. People were buying Fortnite V-Bucks or whatever they are to launder money using it. So once again, Fortnite is involved in some serious crimes.
Weren't they using this this Nintendo breach? Weren't they using it to steal people's in-game purchases or?
As far as I know, the Nintendo store itself did not get bamboozled. What they did apparently is go into Fortnite, get a bunch of Fortnite V-Bucks, and then use that to launder money around.
It's amazing what you can do for money laundering. I know one old system for money laundering is just the lottery. You buy a ton of lottery tickets, you get like 10% of the money back, and they accept the 90% loss to launder the money.
Wow.
That's a terrible way to launder money, but okay. I mean, it works.
There's a high fee involved in laundering money. It's worth it to get one clean dollar for 10 dirty dollars. Anyway,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Sure.
Well, anyway, any more comments?
No.
I'll stop the recording.